back to another episode of Fine Margins. I'm Bella.
And I'm Ben.
And today's episode is about the saga between Andretti and Toto Wolff. So for those of you that don't know, Mario Andretti recently replied to a tweet that was asking or questioning, does Toto Wolff have too much power in F1? To which he said, and let me quote him on this needs to be said, it's about time. And this is following an ongoing saga that we're going to cover in this episode. So first we're going to provide a little bit of context about what the drama is here. Then we're going to go into, well, who is Andretti and the family and what have they done within motorsports for those of you that don't know. We'll also be going into the arguments that team principals have been stating as to whether yes or no Andretti should be coming into Formula 1 and yes or no whether an 11th team should be added to the grid. And we will also be, of course, addressing the big question, which is, does Toto Wolff have too much power in Formula 1? So to kick off with a little bit of context, essentially Michael Andretti and his dad Mario Andretti, who was an ex-Formula 1 driver, has been trying to get into Formula 1 for a few years now. Now they started officially last year when they tried to buy Sauber, who raced under the Alfa Romeo branding, and tried to buy the team, but that purchase fell through, to which he then tried to apply to Formula 1 to bring his own team to the grid. Now, significant steps have been taken towards that. They're in conversations with Renault for the engine. They have started making new hires, looking at production, but there's no certainty as to whether they will be joining the grid in 2024, and it is not approved. For them to be joining, they would also be paying the massive price tag of a $200 million, almost like anti-dilution entrance fee, right, to kind of offset the 10% dilution that the other teams would be getting, because F1 operates as a franchise. And this has caused quite a lot of debate amongst the existing teams, who have obviously recently seen quite a lot of value go into F1 following Drive to Survive and the growth of the sport. And one of the spearheads, surprise, surprise, behind dissenting on letting an 11th team join is Toto Wolff. Now, is he the only person against it? No. But is he arguably the most prominent person in the sport talking against it? Yes. And so began this, I think, quite heated social media based, in-person based fight between Toto Wolff and the Andretti father and son duo. But before we dive into what has been said and what the reasons are and so on and so forth, maybe we should give a little bit of context about who the Andretti family is.
Yeah, so the Andretti family starts really with Mario Andretti, who was a Formula 1 driver and an IndyCar driver, and he was a Formula 1 champion in 1978, I believe, and to this day is still the only American Formula 1 champion. His son Michael raced a bit in Formula 1 but was incredibly successful in IndyCar. Started Andretti Autosports, who compete in IndyCar, Formula E, Extreme E, and they have some ties into NASCAR. So really just a family and a team with a lot of experience throughout all forms of racing.
Yeah, exactly. And that's going to play into the reasons as to whether they should or shouldn't be in the sport and the value they can add. So why have team principals been lobbying against Andretti joining? By the way, this is not all team principals, because obviously, like, for example, Zach Brown has been in conversations with them. He hasn't been vocal about being against them. But, like, what are Toto Wolff's arguments? And I'll quote him, and he says, in a very Toto Wolff fashion, he says, it comes down to the numbers. The value of Formula 1 is that there's a limited amount of franchises, and we don't want to dilute that value by just adding teams. And what he's saying is basically that I can't see having Andretti bringing in more value than it's taking out by diluting the franchise. he makes the argument that over the last 10 years, all of the teams, which arguable, but like have added billions of dollars to making F1 what it is, and it's unfair for a new American team to just join the franchise at the low cost of 200 million and be able to benefit from the value that they've brought over the last decade. Now, I have a problem with that statement because I really disagree with the fact that, and I love Toto Wolff, so usually I would agree with him, but I disagree with the fact that he's saying that we created the value that is Formula One. I think they underplay how much Drive to Survive grew their user base to a young generation. Is in the last, it's not growth that has been steadily accruing over the last 5 or 6 years based on a pre-existing strategy. This is growth that has come within the last 3 years, coincidentally timed with Drive to Survive. Because essentially what happened, in my opinion, is that increasingly sports, people are buying into people more than they're buying into the sports. What Drive to Survive did is it allowed consumers to buy into the drivers, to their personalities, to the drama behind the scenes, more than it made them buy into Formula One. It was more like they bought into the drivers and like everything that happens behind the scenes, and then they bought into Formula One, the sport. Right? And that's obviously seen massive viewership increases, massive increase, like a huge augmentation in the attendance to the races, and obviously an increase in the valuations of the individual teams. So that's point one, right?
So I also think that they were also very fortunate with the timings of
COVID.
Hamilton and Verstappen's
right.
battle last year.
Yeah.
How it catalysed everything, because it was such a obviously immense battle. It was incredibly entertaining. There's so much drama. And I think it was the closest championship battle we've had since some of the ones Vettel won in his 4-year tenure, or Lewis's first one, or perhaps even Raikkonen's one in 2007. So it's been a while since we had such a good championship battle.
Exactly.
And I think that really helped the Drive to Survive. But they really just entertained them massively.
Exactly. And I think in light of that, and you're thinking about, adding an American team, they're about to have 3 American races next year. Well, Texas isn't confirmed, but it's Miami, Austin, and then maybe Texas. Like, marketing and personality brand has brought in so many people into F1. And then they're like, we don't see this American team, who obviously would probably bring in 2 American drivers and like an American base into the sport. Like, that's not going to bring more viewership to a 300 million plus population. I don't know. Like, I can see what he's saying, because I agree, franchise, like, the big thing about them is to protect them. But yeah, I'm not sure, like, they're coming in to dilute a strategy. But ironically, Toto Wolff is quite open to the likes of like Porsche and Audi joining, because he's a bit like, with them comes massive manufacturing infrastructure, massive innovation ability. They would be a huge addition to the paddock. There are really no names in Europe, globally, but like based in Europe. They could be a good addition, and obviously you're seeing manifestations of that with Porsche speaking to Red Bull, maybe to replace Honda, which I think would be super interesting, but different episode. And Audi speaking to Alfa Romeo to potentially buy or get involved with them, right? Now, I have counters to those points, but we'll probably get to those later as to why also I disagree with that being the right point. But he basically says, yeah, like Andretti is a really good name and they've done exceptional things in the US, which they have, which you've kind of covered. Like, their success rate is unbelievable in motorsports. But this is a sport and this is a business, and we need to understand what it is you can provide to the sport. And I think we'll go into what we think they can and cannot provide. And then another kind of spokesman about it has been the Alfa Romeo team principal, Frédéric Vasseur, who was actually a bit harsher than Wolff, and he was basically like, it's not personal, but it is. It comes down to money. But to add another team doing the same things as others with no big added value, I'm not sure it makes sense today. Imagine if you have someone like Porsche that wants to join F1 and wants to do it on their own, does it make sense for us to open the door? In this case, yes, for sure, because it would add a huge value to the paddock. So it's very much this thing where, like, for some reason, there's this, like, narrative that Andretti, it's like they've never been in motorsports, they're not going to add anything else. And it's a bit like, well, what are they not going to add? Is it that they don't have manufacturing ability, which they do because of the other cars? I mean, they're in Formula E. Is it that they're not going to bring marketing, but they will? Like, you know, I think there's more politics there, but it's quite funny because then obviously the Andrettis reacted, and one of the comments was, you know, it's a definite European club, and I'm getting the feeling it's still a European club by the way we're being treated, because we would be a threat. The first real international team. It's a very snobbish approach they're taking. Ultimately, we're going to bring more value than we're going to take away. To which Günther Steiner was like, guys, like, you're trying to get on our good side and you're insulting us. Like, what are you doing? So it's all very interesting, and it all comes at an interesting time in F1's history where we're seeing massive regulatory change. We're seeing a change in the format of the races. We're seeing a change in where we're racing. We're seeing, you know, so many changes, and this is one of those key debates of unlocking, you know, another team in the American market. So those were the arguments primarily given by not just Toto Wolff, but a lot of the team principals. And I guess now we should come to the question of, should Andretti have a place in Formula One?
Well, I think there could be merit to that. Firstly, their argument of having an American team, because obviously with 3 American races and the rising popularity of the sport over there, you know, it could boost viewerships. But I mean, Haas is an American team. You know, people forget that, and you could say,
is it though?
Maybe they sold their soul a little bit with the Ural, I can never pronounce it. You know, having Mazepin as a driver and the Russian sponsorship and basically the Russian flag.
Yeah, but I feel like you think of Haas, the only American instance there are the phone calls that Günther Steiner has with Gene, and that's the only American presence is Gene coming in sometimes.
It's true. And their car is designed like the Ferrari. Yeah. You know, they are Ferrari engines. They do have a factory in North Carolina.
Yeah, they're actually right next to Andretti. In their factory. Yeah, they're like neighbors. But also, like, what Americans... I think most Americans can't even understand what Günther Steiner says. So, like...
Yeah. I mean, they got a German sponsor on their car, the 1-1. And I think... You know, I'm sure there would be love for Andretti, but I think at the end of the day, you know, Formula One fans, you support the best drivers and the best teams most of the times. You know, and you look at it now. There's not that many Haas fans you see in the world, unfortunately. As much as I love Haas, and I've publicly said how much I love Haas and the team, and you know,
and the
comeback they've done this year. But people are Mercedes fans, they're Red Bull fans, you know, they're Ferrari fans.
Do you think people buy into the teams and not the nationalities?
Yeah, I mean, look at Alpine, you know, and I don't have any numbers to back this up, but even in, like, when you saw the crowds in the French Grand Prix, how many Alpine fans do you see out there? It feels very minimal, you know, and they're a French team, you know. But they're Renault, and Renault's a partly government-owned car manufacturer, you know. But no, people, you know, I think people support drivers for their nationality more than teams. Because I also think the thing with teams is, like, you know, Red Bull is technically an Austrian team, factory in England. Alpine's a French team, factory in England. You know, I think it's hard for teams to have a true nationality essence, because you know people do it everywhere. But I also do think there is truth in European bias, because you know people say Porsche, Audi, they're big manufacturers, you know, blah blah blah. But there have been big car names that have come to the sport and fail time after time. I mean, you look on the grid right now. Alfa Romeo have not achieved anything at all. You know, Aston Martin, Lawrence Stroll came in with this whole, funding, and, give them time. They are a new team. They're putting a lot of investments into their factories and stuff like that, so they could come good. But they didn't end up with success.
Yeah.
Teams like Jaguar, they weren't good. Peugeot
Yeah.
had a stint in Formula One.
Yeah.
They weren't successful. Honda, they weren't a very successful team when they had their own team. I mean, the only big car brand that's come in recently and become a success was the Mercedes team, but that's also partly due to the fact that they took over from the Braun
which
team.
was
And Ross Braun, who obviously they won the championship with Jenson Button. So they had
infrastructure,
kind of the infrastructure in place to become a successful team, And you could say that also, I guess, about Aston Martin. They took over the Racing Point, who were a successful team. But, it's being a big brand
doesn't mean you're going to bring...
doesn't translate to big success. Formula One is incredibly difficult.
So there's 2 points there. One is about should nationality drive team presence, and I'll address that. And then the second point is it true actually that bringing in a big brand will add more value? Now, interestingly, I don't think it is the case. Yes, I agree that from an innovation perspective, like Porsche and Audi having the ability to take innovation in F1 and streamline it into the production of their cars is an incredible value and one of the key fundamentals of F1, 100%. But car manufacturers are often the first to go when the going gets tough. Example, Audi and Porsche want to join F1 today, but Porsche and Audi have both withdrawn from the World Endurance Championship, and Audi also recently pulled out of both Formula E and DTM. Now, my counter to that is the Andretti family and Andretti, what's the company name called? Andretti
Autosport.
Andretti Autosport have been consistently present and committed to the passion for motorsports and been successful extensively, right? So, and we'll get to like value, but like even that, right? Consistency and commitment to the sport. So you really tread this line between the love for the racing and the love for Formula One and what it is and pushing the cars and competition and all this stuff. And then the innovation side and the business side of it, which is that like innovation in F1 gets carried out into core manufacturing processes for future cars, right? Now, I'm not sure, like Andretti can't really add to that, but maybe they can, right? Maybe that their experience in motorsports is going to bring a different form of working and approaching the new cars and the new regulations, and will diversify the innovation a little bit, as will their engineers, as will their teams, as will the competition that they bring to the grid, as will their drivers.
No,
so could they impact the innovation? I don't know, like technically I don't know enough the exact value chain of how that works, but like I just think it's not if this or that. Like maybe Andretti could do both, like they do have their own factories in XYZ, and Porsche has come and gone. Has Audi ever been in Formula One before?
No, Porsche was in Formula One briefly during the 50s, early 60s, I think. Audi never.
Exactly.
They've not touched the sport.
Right, so, and then coming down to the nationalism bit, I agree that a sport shouldn't be picked on the nationality of the teams. Like, Frederick Vasseur, back to Alfa Romeo, said the same point. He was like, I don't think added value can come from the nationality of the team. One of the biggest markets of F1 today is the Netherlands, and we don't have a Dutch team, we have a Dutch driver. So I agree with you. People buy into drivers and the personalities of the brands more than they do the nationality. However, Americans might be different, in my opinion. I think Europeans don't buy into nationalism as much. I mean, okay, this is a whole different argument, but Americans do, I think.
I think outside of, I think Ferrari, because they are through and through Italian, for better and for worse, and we've seen a lot of the worst, they're Italian to the core, they won't change. And, you go to see Monza, and they have incredible support there, and they have the support of the country. I think they have an element, there's nationalistic pride in Ferrari, and I think there's a bit of the same with, McLaren, English team, English factory, Williams, but Williams sucks. So again, like who's going to support Williams? And now that especially George Russell's left them. But you know, every other team, Mercedes, it's a German car manufacturer, but they're basically an English team. You know, with factories in England, a lot of the engineers are English. You know, obviously Toto Wolff is Austrian. Both their drivers are English. I think they probably have more support in England than they do in Germany. You know, and you can look for the grid. People have factories everywhere, all over the globe, not in their home countries. But I do agree with your point that, you know, Americans are hardwired slightly differently. You know, I think they are a bit more patriotic towards, especially entering a European market to prove a point. There could be incredible sport. But I think in a perfect world, I'd love to see all three teams have an opportunity.
So go from 10 to 13. That's the solution.
No, not all three of them having teams, but all three of them getting involved. Because obviously Andretti want a team.
Yeah.
And I think it'd be very interesting. Why not? I'd love to. If they could shake up the field, I would be, you know, ecstatic. But, you know, Porsche want to become an engine manufacturer at first, apparently, or they want to partner with the team.
Which would be Red Bull.
They might. Yeah. I think they're trying to partner with Red Bull. And why not having more engine manufacturers on the grid?
Especially...
Again, it could shakes up the grid. And I'm tired of, you know, there's so many... there's the really good teams, and then there's all the other teams trying to become carbon copies of the good teams. You know?
You got the white Ferrari, you've got the...
I love...
green Ferrari.
To death. I love the team, but it is a copy car, you know? And you're not gonna, if you're a midfield team or a back marker, you're not gonna be better than the top teams by copying what they're doing, because you're just not gonna copy it. You're not gonna get a perfect replica of them. You know, you're gonna copy a worse replica of what they're doing. So obviously, logically, you're not gonna be able to overcome them.
Yeah.
So the only way you can become a successful team is by doing something different. You know, and I think having more engine providers can give you the opportunity. Having an entirely new team with, you know, a potentially different philosophy, such as Andretti, that could shake up the field, and that's what you want to see as a fan.
So this is basically bringing us to the second question, which is like, should there be another team on the grid? Full stop. Interestingly, like with the 2026 engine regulations, one of the key pillars of the manifesto of those regulations is to make it attractive for new entrants to come into the F1 market from a production perspective. So they want to make it attractive to have more diverse set of engine manufacturers, and basically like people producing their own cars, so that it's not just Ferrari, Renault, Honda with Red Bull, Mercedes, which is quite cool. Obviously, it's going to be a 50% increase in the electrical power of the cars, plus the 100% sustainable fuels. Now, you take Andretti, there's huge room for innovation. Like, you also can't say, like, the teams now, like, it's all to play for, basically, right? So, before we go on a caveat, so if we're thinking about, okay, let's try and, like, be super clear, pros and cons of a new team. So, pros of a new team, 2 more drivers or more drivers on the grid, better competition, diversity and of thought leadership and approach to innovating in the cars, potentially more viewership, especially with the US. What else do we think? You said more engine, more competition in terms of like engine manufacturers.
More.
Okay, fine. So basically, and all of that is to do, I think, primarily with like another key pillar of the engine 2026 regulations, which is like maintain the spectacle. So keep like the performance and the competition of the sport alive, because it's racing, right? I think a lot of the counter arguments to adding an 11th team, notably Andretti, is a lot more to do with the business side, which is the franchise, which is diluting the existing teams, which is like the monetary aspect, and like the more like taking innovation and putting it into cars and whatever. But primarily what we're seeing is we should probably have more teams on the grid.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the slight counter-argument having also more teams on the grid in terms of performance is that it seems for a while in Formula One there has just been this sustainable gap between the top teams and the midfield, and it's not really shrunk. outside of Ferrari, who've dipped in and out of that position, but you look at their history, you'd hope they always be a successful team. Like McLaren are trying to break through into that that race winning position. Alpine also, but they're still, just for a while, there has been a massive gap. So if an 11th team comes in and they come in as, again, they're just stuck in that midfield position, it's going to separate that gap more, because there's now more teams scrapping for those 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th positions, so that will be more distributed amongst those teams. While the top teams are fighting for, the podium position, 4th, stuff like that.
But the engine regulations have brought parity there, because obviously you had 7 years of dominance for Mercedes, and then last year we had a top 2 battle between Red Bull and Mercedes, and nobody else compared. This year we technically had 3 potential teams. I mean, it was 2 between Red Bull and Ferrari. Now I think Mercedes are only, 30 points behind? They're super close. So like it's actually 3, not for the leading position, but for at least the construct. And I think that the change in the regulations. But the thing is like, and we're gonna go on a tangent here very briefly, and then we'll come back to, does Toto Wolff have too much power? But it's like, in the I'm gonna keep referring to this because it was very interesting. But like in the 2026 engine regulations, they are removing complex parts of the engine, including the MGUH. And the another element that are quite like complicated to level the playing field, and they're kind of bringing in more limitations on how much and what the teams can be testing, but they're really pushing teams to test the and improve the like energy being generated by the batteries. Basically what they're trying to do is to create a level playing field so that there's more parity between the teams, which means there's more competition at the top and not just this big separation, which would address your concern. That's whether that's wrong or right, and maybe we should do an episode on the 2026 engine regulations and how the FIA and F1 is approaching it. I'm not sure that's necessarily the right way to go, because of the other side of F1, which is innovation, and innovation that affects people day to day in automobiles. But they are trying to curb that gap, so we'll see part of that. And I agree with you, like, right, we'll see. Now, do you have any more points on that, or should we talk a little bit about the big question, which is like, does the
big question, does the big man have too much power?
Toto Wolff, right? Super interesting, in my opinion. Inspirational, would work for him any day of the week for free. Guy. I mean, I'm the person that like goes and reads the Harvard Business Review on how his leadership skills made Mercedes the most successful team ever. Like, lovely, great read, would recommend. But does he have too much power? Objectively, what are the things people are stating that would mean he has too much power? And then secondly, really relative to other team principals or other big names on the grid, does he have too much power? So why objectively does Toto Wolff carry power? So he has dominated the sport since he joined Mercedes by inevitably having the most successful team in F1 with a 7-year winning streak until last season, during which they had a 70% Grand Prix win rate. So it was basically 70% sure in every race that they would win, right? Stefano Domenicali, who's the F1 CEO, says his success leaves no doubting F1 team principals that he is the best. Now we'll get on to his relationship with Stefano Domenicali, but like, okay. So with knowledge comes influence, right? Like, when you are the best, people listen. So inevitably, if Toto Wolff says something or Toto Wolff pushes something, he's same as like Hamilton. Hamilton's one of arguably the best driver ever. Again, debate statistically if that's accurate, but like, when he has
Top
more
3
negotiating power in his contracts. It doesn't have to wear all the branded kit that all the other, because he is the best. You just naturally get more influence. So that's objective number one. He has power because he deserves the power. the other things is more like his very kind of expansive presence within the sport financially. So he obviously has a 33% stake in Mercedes, the team. Inevitably, if you own a third of a team, right, you have power. He also was a part owner of the Williams team, which he sold when they got bought out. He has presence in German HWAAG. He has a 49% stake in that. And that's the company, the company that runs the Deutsche Tourenwagen Masters race program for Mercedes-Benz. He has a stake in BR Rally Racing. He's a co-owner of a sports management company with Mika Häkkinen that basically takes care of racing drivers. So he has really quite close ties with a lot of the drivers, including Ocon, including Russell, including young drivers. So his presence amongst the drivers is very extensive. Valtteri Bottas. And he, has a part in Aston Martin as well. So financially, he's present, and that gives you influence as well. When you own things and when you have money stake in things, you get say. I understand that. Fine. And then I think the final thing is people think he plays the FIA, and I think you had some points on this. Does Toto Wolff play the FIA and F1, or does the FIA and F1 let themselves get played?
Well, I always thought that the FIA are just... they don't seem to have any backbone, and teams know that. And I think out of all the regulatory bodies of any sport I follow, this definitely has to be one of the weakest.
Savage.
Because I think, you look at... I think teams aren't afraid to bend the rules of the FIA, and you can look at, in 2018 or 2019, I can't remember, when Ferraris were cheating a little bit with their engine, but they were being able to produce
just
more
a
power.
controlled leakage.
They had incredible straight line speed because they were producing more power with the engine that wasn't coming up on the sensors. And there was the FIA investigation. And then it was all behind closed doors, and then I think there was a bit of a fine, and then they changed the engine, but no one knows, until I think this year, Binotto admitted that we're not cheating this year, but so basically he admitted.
Did he admit it,
cheated.
or is he trying to prevent it? Yeah.
That he cheated, granted 2-3 years later, and there was no punishment, or not Aston Martin, but Aston Martin's former self, Racing Point, when they copied the Mercedes car, basically, and they were called the Pink Mercedes. And again, there was an investigation, blah, blah, blah. Fined the team, X amount of money. But they were allowed to keep their car. And it makes no... you punish someone you don't. You don't do these weird middle ground things that they do. It makes no sense. And I think because of that, team principals know, and Toto Wolff knows this, and Christian Horner knows this, and I think those two are probably the best at, lobbying things that's in line with their agendas. They know, you can push them, you can press them.
Yeah.
And there's no major punishment, and there's no repercussion for really what you do. Even look at, the end of Abu Dhabi last year, whether you're a Max fan or Lewis fan, and whether he deserved to win, that's a completely different argument. But there were, in terms of how they ruled, the safety cars overlapping and that whole sequence, they came out and said, the wrong decisions were made, and scapegoated Michael Massey,
who a year later gets fired mysteriously.
Yeah, it's he had too much responsibility. Scapegoated him. He went for a lot of then obviously depressing stuff with people, threatening him, his family, which is all, it's incredible that people still do that today, and it's disgusting to see in the sport. But so they scapegoat him and then fire him. There's no self-responsibility. Yeah. There's no backbone, and I think teams and people, especially people as smart as Toto Wolff and Christian Horner any team principal, the powerful teams, they know that they can push things as they want, and the FIA will listen.
Because it's not like he's doing it, you know, illegally, or like if you're someone who's smart, if you're a smart businessman, which Toto is, or just in business generally, people can't get upset at you when you do well because you know how to do your job. Obviously, I think probably one faux pas that was done was when Toto was with Stefano Domenicali and who else was he with? He was with someone else, I forget, but another prominent person in F1 on their boat together holidaying. Okay, if you holiday with the CEO of F1, I can see how that looks. But outside of that, he's just very good at what he does. There's a reason that he's created the most successful team. It's not because he's a dumb guy. So, like, you can get annoyed that he has influence, but he has influence because he's good. So, basically, to answer the question, does Toto Wolff have too much power? I disagree. No, he doesn't. I just think he's good at what he does. Other people should do better, really simply. And I think you had some points on this. What about Lawrence Stroll? What about how much power he has? I mean, the guy, extensively, like an octopus, is, like, involved in everything, right?
Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, he's another, you know, billionaire, owns his team. His son's racing for his team. You know, he has a lot of relationships, strong relationships with Toto Wolff and the Mercedes team. You know, he's involved heavily, but, you know, he doesn't have the same amount of power or success.
But he got away with copying a car 2 years in a row.
No, get away with copying the car, but
Cussed
you know,
out the FIA, no problem.
No, exactly. It's the game. We know Formula One is, as much as it's about performance on track, it's all about the politics behind the scheme. And I think, you know, you enjoy that to a certain degree, you know, and you want teams to a certain extent to try and bend the rules, you know, to try and get that extra performance out of the car, just bend the rules a little bit, do this, do that. But I think, you know, you're in a situation now with F1 where, you know, you have teams, you know, like, because I hate beating on both these teams, but, you know, Ferrari and Haas, and they have such an incredibly close relationship. Engine manufacturers, Haas have to have a junior driver, and now look how similar the cars are. You know, and I know there's rules in F1 that state, you know, you can kind of reverse engineer in other teams if you understand what they're doing. There's certain way you can make your car look, you know, you can take pieces of another car, but, you know, the car is incredibly identical, and I think most people know it's because of their strong relationship. You know, and they probably share information. But I think that's the standard of F1 and stuff like that is now accepted when, you know, I think the FIA should be a little bit tougher. Not that I want them to be tough on Haas, because there's no point beating up a dead horse. And I'm still hoping these new Haas upgrades lead to a race win this year. That would be my dream, honestly. But, you know, I think they're a weak-willed governing body, you know. And like I said before, they know they can get away with stuff when they break the rules.
Cool. Okay, so that's the thing, right? Andretti Toto situation. I think we do think Andretti deserves a place on the grid or an 11th team, as long as it promotes the values of racing without curbing innovation. Does Toto Wolff have too much power? No. Is his power potentially the result of the environment? Yes. Is he also very good at what he does? Yes. And then I think the key question is, like, what does, you know, we don't have to address this now, but I think the key question that maybe for people to think about is, like, what does value mean within an F1 team? Is it commitment to the sport? Is it commitment to innovation? Is it pre-existing knowledge? Is it infrastructure and manufacturing ability? Is it money? Is it money, right? Like, is it just money to the sport? Is it marketing? Is it everything? I think we kind of saw where we stand, but yeah. And, like, a really final point is, I think Toto Wolff, his power is more fair game than Lawrence's, because I feel like Lawrence has bought a lot of his power. I think Toto earned a lot of his power, albeit through immense investment into Mercedes, but I think he deserves the power that he has. Lawrence I'm less sure about, but, like, let's see how their plan pans out. So that's it. Do you want to close off this episode?
Oh god, I've never closed off an episode before.
First time for everything.
The pressure. What's only episode like 3 or 4? I can't remember this point.
Only like upwards from here.
Hey guys, thank you all for listening. Please follow us on Instagram, TikTok, Twitter. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Follow us on Spotify. Follow us on LinkedIn if you're a complete psychopath. What else do we have? Is that all we have?
Across all streaming
that's
channels.
about what we have. Email us.
DM us.
If you're insane. Let us know what you think. About what we said, how we can improve. What all is. But yeah, thank you guys for listening.
So much.